This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com, your place to explore the game.
Hi, my name is Brian, and this is my budget Tromokratis EDH deck. Welcome to my Tromokratis budget EDH deck tech. This deck originally started off as me kind of throwing together some draw spells, some instants and sorceries that would tap down my opponent's creatures and just attacking with Tromokratis and getting in there for general damage. But over time it's kind of evolved into more of like a mid-rangey control deck. I use some other creatures besides Tromokratis to deal damage and have more permanence that can tap down creatures as well, not just instants and sorceries. So there could be better alternatives to some of these cards if you have, the money for it. This deck was built under $100, so I mean, if you are someone who's new to the format, doesn't really know exactly where to begin, but likes having more of a controlling deck, this is definitely something that you could look into as like a shell for a mono blue deck. So Tromokratis is a 7-mana 8/8 Kraken. He has hexproof unless it's attacking or blocking, so once he gets into the red zone, he loses his hexproof. And he cannot be blocked unless all creatures defending player block it. So that's why I'm referring to all these tapping spells, because once we get one of their creatures tapped, Tromokratis is unblockable, and he can start getting in there for commander damage. And just by himself, he's a 3-turn General Clock. We can make him a 2-turn General Clock using one of our equipments, as well as a 1-hit kill if we have both of the different equipments that we need to make him a 1-hit kill. So we're going to get into the land base. I have 29 islands in the deck. So we're going to move all these guys away from here. And 7 non-basic lands. First one up is Myriad Landscape. Enters the battlefield tapped and can tap for a colorless mana, and for 2 mana tapping it we can sacrifice it and search our deck for 2 basic land cards that share a land type, put it onto the battlefield tapped, so it helps ramp our islands. Temple of the False God, classic EDH non-basic land, able to tap for 2 colorless mana if we control 5 or more lands. This one's really good. Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. We do have a lot of blue permanents in this deck with some blue mana symbols, so this one can tap for a good healthy amount of mana, not anything too broken, but it does ramp us up a little bit more. Mystifying Maze, this is more of one of our budget options. Normally I think people would be running Maze of Ith in this slot, but I think Mystifying Maze might be even a little bit better than Maze of Ith, because it returns the attacking creature back to the battlefield tapped instead of just, back untapped. So I think this is a little bit better of an option for Tromokratis, because again, he likes having those opponents having tapped creatures instead of untapped. Now, we do have a Cathedral of War in here. This is the only source of Exalted we have in the deck, so it's a little strange why it's in here. It just helps give Tromokratis an extra little, +1/+1 buff. Normally we're just going to be attacking with Tromokratis if he's on the battlefield, so this is another good one just to help make him a little bigger. Reliquary Tower. What blue EDH deck goes without Reliquary Tower? We're going to be drawing some cards, and it's always nice not having to discard down to 7. And the last of our non-basic lands is Rogue's Passage. This is our last-ditch effort to kind of give Tromokratis his unblockability, in case we can't tap down creatures, or we don't have any of the other spells that make him unblockable. It taps for a colorless, and also for 4 mana we can tap it and then give a creature unblockable this turn. So that is the rest of our land base. Now we get into our mana rocks. First one off is Everflowing Chalice. Classic mana rock. It's a 0-mana artifact with multi-kicker 2. Enters the battlefield with a charge counter for each time it was kicked, and it can tap for a colorless mana for each charge counter on it. So Early game, we can make this into another Soul Ring. Late game, into something like a Thran Dynamo, or even a bigger mana rock. Soul Ring, nothing else needs to be said about this. We all know what it does. Mind Stone, it's a 2 mana rock that can tap for our colorless, and also once we have our mana base set up, we're all good. We can tap a colorless and tap it as well, sacrifice it, and draw a card, so we get to recycle it. Sapphire Medallion. For 2 mana, we get an artifact that reduces the casting cost of all of our blue spells by 1. So, it's a monocolored deck. This one's pretty good for blue. Worn Powerstone. It enters the battlefield tapped for 3 mana and can tap for 2 colorless mana. So again, it's another small mana rock. Thran Dynamo. For 4 colorless mana, we get an artifact that can tap for 3. So again, just another good ramping spell. And finally, Cage Sun. It doubles our mana for 6 mana. It also gives our blue creatures +1/+1, which is, again, another big thing. We have a lot of these effects in the deck that give all of our blue creatures +1/+1. Now, normally you would think Tromokratis would be more of like a Voltronic commander, having just stuffing the deck with lots of artifacts and equipment that just help him boost up his power and just smash people in the face. Well, this deck does have only 3 equipments that Tromokratis can wear, which is a little strange, but these ones are probably the best ones that you could run. You could obviously run, sort of protection and value and all sorts of other things, but for the purposes of this deck, we're just running 3. Swiftfoot Boots is the first one. For 2 mana, the equipped creature gets Hexproof and Haste, equips for 1. This is how Tromokratis will get Hexproof all the time, which is always good. Loxodon Warhammer actually makes him a 2-turn General Clock, gives the equipped creature +3/+0 and lifelink with Trample, equips for 3. We need life gain in this deck. That's one thing that blue always has troubles with, and essentially we're not taking extra turns or doing any broken combos in the deck, so we gotta be able to stay in the game, so this is how we're going to do it. Even if we're not equipping it to Tromokratis, we can equip it to one of our massive Leviathans or Krakens to gain some life. And also, Tromokratis can become a one-hit kill if we also have Fireshrieker on him, as well as the Loxodon Warhammer, because the equipped creature will get double strike. So that's one way we can win. Now up for some draw spells, and the beginning ones here are just going to be some cantrips and other just small spells that can draw some cards. Brainstorm. For a single blue, it's an instant, draws us 3 cards, and then we put 2 of our cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. This one's pretty good. Ponder, so 1 mana sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library, and then you get to draw a card. This one's also pretty good. I think Brainstorm might be a little bit better. Thought Scour, this is more tech for answering top of library tutoring. If someone tutors up a combo piece or a really big creature that they want to be able to cast, we can Thought Scour them, make them discard the top 2 cards of their deck, and then we also get to draw a card. This one's really good as well. Into the Roil is one of our answers to enchantments, artifacts, and planeswalkers. For 2 mana, we get an instant with Kicker for 2. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If it was kicked, we also get to draw a card. That's one thing this deck has a lot of troubles with, is artifacts, enchantments, other things that are not creatures. So this one is definitely really good for us. Merchant Scroll. Originally this was Impulse in the deck, but I didn't realize that Impulse had a rules change where you couldn't shuffle your library afterwards. So I had this card lying around, and I thought, this might be a better addition. It's a 2 mana sorcery that lets us search up a instant card, reveal it, put it into our hand, and then we get to shuffle our library. So this lets us search up any of the 26 instants of the deck. Now we get on to the 2 creatures that can draw some cards when they are on the field. Stormsurge Kraken, this is a new addition from Commander 2014. For 5 mana, we get a 5/5 Hexproof Kraken with Lieutenant. So as long as we control Tromokratis, he gets +2/+2, and when he becomes blocked, we can draw 2 cards. So if someone doesn't want to take the 7 damage, they block him, we get to draw some cards. And Sphinx of Magosi, for 6 mana, we get a 6/6 flyer that for 3 mana, we can draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on him. For this slot, if you want to make an upgrade to the deck, this would probably be the Consecrated Sphinx of the deck. But Consecrated Sphinx does get a lot of hate in EDH. Once it hits the table, it kind of game just warps around it and says, okay, who's going to deal with, the Sphinx on the table? Because this guy's going to get way too many cards. This guy kind of flies under the radar a little bit more. Yeah, he's a 6/6 flyer, gives us 3 devotion to blue, so he can be kind of scary. But in terms of the card advantage, kind of just like, alright, whatever. I mean, he's got a big old Sphinx, like, whatever, So this one can actually get us some card advantage as well without giving us the big target on our head that the Consecrated Sphinx could give. But if you have the money to buy Consecrated Sphinx, I would definitely put him in here. Now for our 2 X draw spells, Stroke of Genius. For X, 2 colorless and a blue, we get an instant that says target player draws X cards. Again, I mean, we do like drawing a lot of cards. We can make a lot of mana with our mana rocks. So this one's really good. But we do also run Blue Sun Zenith, triple blue and X for an instant. Target player draws X cards. And then we get to shuffle this back into our library, so we can use it again later on in the game. Now, what blue deck would be complete without some counter spells? So we have 8 of them here. These are ones, they're a little bit different because they either will exile the card that they counter, or they do something else for the opponent, or draw some cards, leave tokens. Swan Song is the one that makes a token. For a single blue, we get an instant that counters a enchantment, instant, or sorcery. And then its controller puts a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying onto the battlefield. This is good to stop combos from going off with enchantments, as well as preventing kill spells from hitting Tromokratis when he's attacking. Arcane Denial, a classic counterspell for EDH. For 2 mana, we get an instant that counters a spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and we also get to draw a card at the next turn's upkeep. So gets us a little bit of card advantage. It, gives them a little bit of cards where it's like, oh, okay, you counter my spell, but I get to draw a couple cards. That's fine. Syncopate. This is the first of our exile counter spells. For X and a blue, we get an instant that counters a spell unless its controller pays X. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard. Dissolve. This one I'm thinking about replacing. It's for 3 mana, instant, and there goes the phone. Alright, sorry about that, guys. This is the first of our 3 mana counter spells. The one I was thinking about maybe replacing. It counters a spell and lets us scry 1. One of the other replacements we could do for this card is Hinder. It's the same cost, except we get to tuck the countered card into the bottom of the player's library. So, I'm not sure if we want to have this one or Hinder. We'll just have to see what happens. Spell Crumple is the other tuck ability counter spell that we have. Same cost. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it onto the bottom of its owner's library instead of onto the player's graveyard. Put it onto the bottom of its owner's library as well. So this was a really powerful counter spell. Lets us tuck generals into their decks, as well as other giant creatures that they want to cast. And we also get to put it back into our library so we can fetch it up with Merchant Scroll as well. Dream Fracture. This is the other possible substitute we have for Hinder. Same cost, counters a spell, its controller draws a card, and we also get to draw a card. Again, it's just another one of those, oh, you counter my spell, but I get to draw a card type of spells. Dissipate, 3 mana, counters a spell. If the spell is countered this way, exile it instead. Again, it's very important that we get to exile these cards instead of putting them in the graveyard. I can't talk today. My play group has a lot of effects that work with the graveyard, so being able to exile spells is very good. And the last of our counter spells is Dismiss. For 4 mana, we get to counterspell and draw a card. So obviously there are going to be some better options for counter spells that are out there, but these are some pretty good ones for on a budget. Now, when you think blue, you don't normally think of spot removal, but blue does have a couple of options that have been printed in recent years that give us this flexibility. So we do have a couple of spot removal spells in the deck. The first one being Rapid Hybridization. For a blue, we get an instant that destroys a creature. It can't be regenerated, and its controller gets a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token on the field. And in the same vein, we have Pongify. Same card, single blue instant destroy creature, can't be regenerated, but its controller puts a 3/3 green ape creature token onto the battlefield. These are really good because not a whole lot of creatures in EDH have protection from blue. A lot of them, for example, Akroma has protection from red and black, so we can make her into an ape or a frog lizard, which is very good. Reality Shift, a new addition from Fate Reforged. For 2 mana, we get to exile a creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. Once again, this works really nicely with top of the library tutoring. If someone tutors up an instant, we can reality shift one of their creatures to make them put that instant onto the field as a 2/2 creature, which obviously then could be destroyed or something that could happen where it doesn't go into their hand. As well as, again, it's exile removal, so it gets around indestructibility very nicely. Hour of Need. 3 mana for an instant with Strive. It costs 2 more to cast for each target beyond the first. Exile any number of target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 4/4 blue Sphinx creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Again, very important to get exiling removal spells. The 4/4s can be a bit of a trouble because, that's a lot of power we're giving people if we Strive this multiple times, but oftentimes I'm just using this as a 3 mana removal spell to give them a 4/4 instead of something like an Avacyn. And one of my favorite spot removal spells in blue is Curse of the Swine. It's a double blue and X for a sorcery. Exile X target creature cards. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. Again, exile removal is very powerful, and being able to just give them 2/2 boars is better than 4/4 flyers. But you'll notice that a lot of our removal gives the people tokens or things afterwards. So we have a Ratchet Bomb as a way to deal with those different threats. Normally you would put charge counters on it and then blow up the board. But in the case for this deck, we're not really putting charge counters on it. We can just tap it, sacrifice it, and then blow up everyone's tokens. Very powerful for dealing with all of the different tokens that we're making for people, as well as just in general dealing with token-based strategy decks. Now we're going on to our Wrath effects. Again, it's very different with blue. We don't have a lot of destroy target creature or every creature effects like that. It's more like bounce. So first one we have is Cyclonic Rift, one of the more powerful spells in EDH in blue. For 2 mana, we get an instant return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand with Overload. So for 7 mana, we can bounce all the permanents we don't control to their owner's hands. Again, one of the ways we can deal with artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, things like that. Polymorphous Jest. For 3 mana, double blue and colorless, we get an instant that turns all of opponent's creatures into 1/1 blue frogs with no other abilities. It's kind of the worst sudden spoiling because it doesn't have split second, but still, we're in blue, we work with what we have, and this one's really powerful as well as really funny. Just if someone attacks into someone's board, we can turn them all into 1/1 frogs before blocks, and then, people can take out creatures as they see fit. Aetherize, it's a little mini Aether Spouts. Instant for 4 mana, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Very powerful. Again, if someone's alpha striking you with tokens or with elves, just return all the creatures to their owner's hand. Domineering Will. For 4 mana, instant, target player gains control of up to 3 target non-attacking creatures until end of turn. Untap those creatures, they block the turn if able. This one can also be very political as well. If someone's not doing so well and someone else is, just full out attacking them, we can hit this card, let them gain control of 3 other creatures that someone else controls and have them block, which is very nice, can be used as removal. Whelming Wave is probably the more flavorful match removal spell that we have in the deck. It's our Wrath of God. For 4 mana, we get a sorcery that returns all creatures to their owner's hands except for Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents. We do have a lot of Krakens and Leviathans. I think we have 1 Octopus, so we do have some creatures that survive this and can also then attack into the open board. Aether Spouts, as I mentioned before, is 5 mana instant. For each attacking creature, its owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. Again, very powerful, just being able to stop an all-out attack. Evacuation is a hyper Aether Spouts. It's kind of like our emergency panic button, as it were. For 5 mana, we get an instant that returns all creatures to their owner's hands. So, I mean, if someone's hitting a Wrath of God or just straight up going to be killing all of our creatures somehow, we can hit this and just say, no, I want to have all my creatures back into my hand. That, or it can be used as, again, another removal spell in case something bad happens and we just need all the creatures gone. And the last of our mass removal spells is, again, one of my favorites. It's very flavorful in the deck, being a giant Kraken creature, Scourge of Fleets. For 7 mana, we get a 6/6 Kraken that, when it enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands we control. We do run into a lot of islands in the deck, so this guy's going to be able to bounce pretty much everyone else's board. You can combo with him with Deadeye Navigator. We don't play that combo. It's just not fun. Deadeye Navigator's a pretty broken card. And this is one of the ways that you can break him, just, being able to keep flickering Scourge of Fleets in and out, and making sure that your opponents can't stick any creatures on the board. It's not very fun, but you can do it if you want. And now we move on to our spells that make Tromokratis unblockable. These are tap effects, just overall making him unblockable, or giving him flying. Bluster Squall is a 1 mana instant that taps our creature we don't control. Also with Overload, we can tap all of the creatures we don't control. Again, just very powerful effect. Icy Blast, it's a better... Frost Breath, that's what I'm thinking of. It's a blue and an X instant, tap X target creatures. And if we have Ferocious, which if we have Tromokratis, of course we'll have this ability go off. If we control power of 4 or greater, those creatures that we tapped don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. Quiet Contemplation is one of the permanents that we have that can tap creatures. For 3 mana, we get an enchantment. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we can pay a single colorless. If we do, tap target creature an opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Now, you also could run Flood in this deck. It's a single blue for an enchantment that you can pay 2 blue and tap a non-flying creature. They do get to untap it at the untap step, so I do like this a little bit more, but, I mean, if you can buy it, it's probably not that expensive. I don't think so. It's I think a common or an uncommon, one of the two. But that's another option you can run instead of Quiet Contemplation. Thassa, God of the Sea. For 3 mana, we get an Indestructible Enchantment God. As long as your devotion is blue is less than 5, she's not a creature. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to scry 1, which is one of the reasons why we're running her, is just because we can start scrying, either hit our land drops or clear out. If we're getting mana flooded, we can just, clear out our lands. And for 2 mana, we can make a creature unblockable, which is one of the more important uses of Thassa. Paragon of Gathering Mists acts as a pump spell for all of our blue creatures for 4 mana, and for a blue and tapping him, we can give another target blue creature that we control flying until end of turn. So again, a flying giant 8/8 Kraken coming at a person's face. They can't block it because it's flying, and unless they're running all flyers, then he's going to be able to be unblockable. Silent Arbiter is an interesting addition to the deck. I got this from a conspiracy draft. It was the first rare I opened, and I was looking at him, and I thought, wow, this guy's not that great for a draft, but I was reading over his abilities, and I said, well, that would be really good in Tromokratis. For 4 mana, we get a 1/5 artifact creature construct. No more than 1 creature can attack each combat, and no more than 1 creature can block each combat. So if a person has more than 1 creature, he makes it so Tromokratis is unblockable, because he makes a condition that only 1 creature can block. Tromokratis says every creature they control has to block, so he's another way to make him just straight up unblockable. Sleep. For 4 mana, we get a sorcery spell that taps all the creatures a target player controls. They don't untap during their untap steps. Again, just tap matters. Frost Titan. He's a big 6/6 for 6 giant. When he becomes a target of a spell or ability, we can counter that unless they pay 2. That's not exactly what we're using him for. It's more for the tapping down permanence ability. We're mainly just going to be tapping down creatures with him, but if we want to tap down a Guy's Cradle or a Cabal Coffers, we can do that as well. Just kind of handle some troublesome lands. Shipbreaker Kraken. For 6 mana, we get a 6/6 Kraken with Monstrosity 4. For 8 mana, when it becomes monstrous, he becomes a 10/10, as well as taps down 4 target creatures. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps for as long as we control Shipbreaker Kraken. So he's another very good addition to the deck, just being able to lock down multiple creatures from across the board as long as we control him. And also, being a 10/10, he's going to be difficult to deal with. Archetype of Imagination. For 6 mana, we get a 3/2 Human Wizard that gives all of our creatures flying and takes away flying from everyone else. Again, gives Tromokratis flying, and he can just get in there and start attacking. Lorthos the Tidemaker. He is a potential win condition in this deck. He's an 8/8 for 8. When he attacks, we can pay 8 colorless. If we do, tap up to 8 target permanents. Those permanents don't untap during the controller's untap steps. If you wanted to, if someone's behind, you could tap down all of the lands they control, or most of the lands they control, so that they can continue not to do anything, and then just keep hitting them with an 8/8. That's generally not what we want to use him for, but again, it's another possibility. We normally want to tap up some creatures, some troublesome artifacts and permanents, and then just attack with Tromokratis. Breaching Leviathan is the last of our tapping abilities and making him unblockable. For 9 mana, we get a 9/9 Leviathan that when it enters the battlefield, if we cast it from our hand, we tap all non-blue creatures, and they do not untap during their untap steps. Again, just another giant creature that we can have that can start attacking and hold down the fort. Now, we do run quite a bit of instants and sorceries, so it is important that we can buy them back. We have 3 ways of doing that. Call to Mind is our first. For 3 mana, we get a sorcery that, of course, returns an instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. This is pretty good. Works well with Talrand, which we'll get into in a second here, but it's a cheap way to get back some instants or sorceries that we need, either like wrath spells, counter spells, or targeted removal. Archaeomancer is a 1/2 Human Wizard for 4 that has the same ability. When it enters the battlefield, return an instant or sorcery to our hand. And Mnemonic Wall. For 5 mana, we get a 0/4 Defender with the same ability. And the last few cards that we have are more stall cards, or ways for us to sacrifice tokens so that we don't have to sacrifice our giant creatures. The first one we have is Propaganda. For 3 mana, we have an enchantment that says creatures can attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each attacking creature he or she controls. This does not work with Planeswalkers. If they are attacking, a Planeswalker you control, the attacks doesn't happen. But we don't have any Planeswalkers in the deck, so that's fine. They still have to pay the 2. Rhystic Study, classic blue enchantment for 3. Sorry, the camera just skipped here a little bit. So this helps us get some card advantage, as well as helps our opponents to stop playing spells in the early game, because they don't want us to draw up more cards. Deep Sea Kraken, it's a little strange. We never want to be hard casting this guy. It's just terrible value. For 10 mana, he's a 6/6 that cannot be blocked. More often than not, we're trying to suspend him in the early game. So when he's suspended, we get 9 time counters on him. And when an opponent casts a spell, if he's suspended, we remove a time counter from it. So it's like, if you want to play spells in the early game, sure, we'll just get a 6/6 unblockable Kraken in the early game. And the last bit of our stall cards is also another potential win condition, Stormtide Leviathan. For 8 mana, we get an 8/8 Leviathan with Island Walk. He makes all other lands islands in addition to the other types, and creatures without flying or Island Walk can't attack. So again, he could potentially lock out Tromokratis from attacking, but if we have Paragon of Gathering Mists or the Archetype, we can give him flying and he can still attack, while other creatures are still locked out, so he's very good as well. And the last 3 cards of our deck are token producers. The first 2 are more for sacrifice fodder, in case, someone's running sacrifice synergies. We can sacrifice the tokens instead of our big creatures. Master of Waves, a standard all-star in mono blue devotion, is now in our deck here for EDH. For 4 mana, we get a 2/1 Merfolk Wizard with protection from red. Elemental creatures you control get +1/+1. And when he enters the battlefield, we get a number of 1/0 blue elemental creature tokens with equal to your devotion to blue. So, again, we're looking to cast this guy with a heavy devotion to blue board, so we get a lot of tokens that we can either use to attack into an opponent, block, or sacrifice, so we don't have to sacrifice our big value creatures. Talran, Sky Summoner. Again, 4 mana for a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying on the battlefield. Again, same concept here. We're just making tokens for blocking, potentially for attacking. If we're in the all clear, nothing's really going on, we can start using them to get aggressive, as well as sacrifice fodder. And the last card of our deck is probably the most broken card of our deck, Rite of Replication. For 4 mana, we get a sorcery with kicker 5. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature. If it was kicked, we get 5 copies of that creature instead. The last time I saw this cast, it was targeting a Sun Titan. You can imagine how that went. This is very good just as another finisher type of a spell. We're never really using this for sacrifice fodder. We're just we're getting the best possible creatures with this, and just riding the game with the rest of those creatures. Now, of course, this is a budget deck. There are some other non-budget options that you could use instead. I have a list on tappedout.net that hopefully will be in the description below, where you can check out the maybe board. I have some suggestions of different spells that you guys could look into to increase the power level of this deck, but if you're just looking to start EDH and get into the format, this is a good way to kind of just get yourself familiar with it for a cheap price. I know a lot of decks are, hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for tier 1 EDH decks. This is more of a casual mono blue control deck you can play with your friends and just go beat face with a giant Kraken. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching CMDR Decks. Please subscribe and favorite.